May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be aligned with your love, O God, our strength, our courage, and our freedom. Amen. I had to preach today on learning because the sentence from Hebrews 5:8 just turned on the blue light special and said, preach about me. Although Jesus was a human child, a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. And having been made perfect, in other words, he was not born perfect, having developed perfection, he became the source of eternal wholeness for all who listen and obey him. My life was truly altered when a colleague of mine, when I was the rector of a church in Pasadena, California, came back from a continuing education week. And I said, Ann, what did you learn? She said, the most amazing thing. What? She said, they had us, it was Betty Sue Flowers who was her teacher. They had us outline our life in three ways. First, to outline our life as a victim. And then they had us write a different story, outlining our life as a victor or a winner. And then they had us outline our life as a learner. Three different energies, three different ways of relating to people, three different ways of having professional relationships, three different ways to have conversations. And when you're trying to feed your ego by always wanting to win, coerce, control the agenda, or if you enter a conversation absolutely expecting to lose, and once again be beaten up. Or you enter a conversation and no matter how it goes, to say to yourself, I'm learning something here. Three different energies, three different outcomes, three different personalities. My wife and I are going to get on the road after announcements so that I can preach this afternoon at 4 o'clock in Atlanta in the church that I was trained and ordained. It's St. Luke's Church in Atlanta. And Friday was the Feast of St. Luke's, and St. Luke's in Atlanta is celebrating St. Luke's Day all day long. And what you do with St. Luke is one of the readings appointed is to hold up with reverence your doctors, your physicians, because Luke was a physician, and pharmacists. It makes me think about a parishioner here who has kind of let me into his struggle with cancer. And he told me about how important it is to have doctors and pharmacists who are always learning. He said, Ed, if I had had this melanoma 5 years ago, before my doctor learned about immunotherapy, I wouldn't be here talking with you. We bank on our doctors, our pharmacists, our Jesus, our leaders to be learners. I was in a meeting Friday afternoon, and Ashley Pipes was in the meeting, and we just had a great session, and she and I walked out, and I said, "Now, what do you do, Ashley?" And she said, "Well, actually, I'm on the faculty of the PhD program at UTC on leadership and learning." Well, my brain went ding, 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 ding. Tell me more about that. You can go and get a PhD on the correlation between leadership and learning? And she started to unpack it. I went to the website, and there they have this wonderful quotation from John F. Kennedy saying, "Learning and leadership are indispensable to each other." Save me from people who are not learning. We lost a really wonderful mystic, theologian, writer this past week. Dr. Barbara Jackson, one of my favorite, Barbara Holmes, one of my favorite poets. And she, my favorite book of hers is called Crisis Contemplation. Because now we have to introduce into our reflections about learning, we have to introduce the issue of suffering. Because Hebrews is saying that Jesus did the learning that he did that helped him grow up and become an emissary between the God world and the people world. He had to go through what some translators call the school of suffering. We can't really learn about all of life unless we learn about suffering. Jesus went to school on suffering. He saw suffering all around him. In order for him to be a servant of all and of allness and to be a part of the enterprise of love, he knew he had to enter into the world of suffering, the school of suffering. And what he discovered there was this mystical mix of joy and pain. This mystical mix of God's presence in the midst of all of our chaos. Since I've been your interim rector, I think I've had some of the most painful personal moments in my entire life. I've talked about the fact that our son was in a tough struggle for the custody of his child, who on the plane back to New Orleans right now. Deep moments of weeping, asking why. And what I discovered, and I'm still discovering, is what I think Jesus discovered in his learning so much that he evolved, that he developed, he grew up to become this emissary. And it's captured in this particular poem from Dr. Holmes that I want to read to you. It's only 2 stanzas. At the center of every crisis is an inner space. That inner space is so deep and so beckoning, so suddenly and daringly vast, that it feels like a universe. Feels like God. when the unthinkable happens and does not relent, we fall through our hubris toward an inner flow, an abiding and rebirthing darkness that feels like home. What Jesus tells us, what wisdom tells us, what mysticism tells us, what the contemplative life tells us, is that when suffering comes, don't be in denial about its pain, but don't be unaware that in the deepest parts of the suffering is God. I've named to myself, I've named our little gathering every Thursday afternoon of people who come together for centering prayer, a kind of a group spiritual direction experience. So the bishop, when he asked me to come here, and I said, what are you asking me to do? He said, well, you have this reputation of being a contemplative, and I know that that's the case for you, and I think St. Paul's is in such good shape, and I think it also could handle learning a little bit about contemplative prayer. Now, one of the things I loved about Dr. Barbara Holmes is she said that her contemplative practice, and she taught at Richard Rohr's contemplative school, that her best spiritual practice for contemplation was fly fishing with her husband. So please, I'm not going to get down on just fundamentalistic one way of contemplating. Other people get to a contemplative space by gardening, others by knitting, others by forest bathing, and others, in addition to any of those, through centering prayer. And so on one Sunday, I think it was the second Sunday I was here, I asked everybody to just tear off a blank piece of paper from their liturgy and give me their name and contact information if they'd like to come for the study of contemplative prayer through the summer. And we read and studied Cynthia Bourgeau's book, The Heart of Centering Prayer. 75 people came throughout this hot summer. And we finished that, and then we put the book away and said, let's get together every Thursday afternoon and practice. And so we've been doing that. 25 people come. Y'all get to come. You don't have to know anything about centering prayer to come. Just come on Thursday afternoons at 5:30. And this past Thursday, a person talked to us about her suffering. And we listened. And then somebody remembered that the great Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh said, whenever you have suffering in your life, or when you're absolutely consumed with anger or depression, one thing please remember to do is to ask it, after welcoming it, ask it, what have you come to teach me? The reason Jesus was so victorious was not because he set out to be a victor or a victim, but because he set out to be a learner. And remember, Michelangelo, when he was 87, said, I'm still learning. Jesus, up to they're nailing him on the cross, kept saying, not my will, but yours be done. I'm still learning. Let's all ask the search committee to find us a rector who's still learning. Let us commit ourselves to the way of Jesus, to learn. And every time suffering comes our way, let's go so deep, so daringly vast, that we discover God loving us on the learning curve so that it feels like home. Amen.